Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us a little bit later than usual on this wonderful Wednesday evening. My name is Sean Phillips. I am joined tonight by my good friends, Mr. Andy Van Beber and Mr. Travis Kirkendall. And folks, we are the Voice of Reason podcast. Gentlemen, how are you two doing this lovely evening?
I'm just glad that we can actually connect and be online with each other tonight. This has been a nightmare from hell week, I think.
I know,
Yeah.
first world problems,
What do they call it? This is first world problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. They actually the second worst case of problems one can have, just short to white girl problems, are actually the number one problem that one can have. So
I thought that was daddy issues.
those are part of white girl problems. Yeah, it is all roped into
category.
one category. Yeah, no, gentlemen, and for the listeners, again, thank you guys so much for your patience. This has been a little bit of a crazy week with a bunch of kind of last minute stuff happening on Monday, and then due to Andy having some internet issues, and it wasn't just like his home
internet.
The entire town of Pittsfield went back to their Amish roots, and they just
actually it was the southern half of Pike County, to tell you the truth. But that's,
man, isn't it wild?
that's like a block.
There's a
That's
good
like a block
episode
in Chicago.
Right. There's a great episode of South Park that makes fun of like what happens when the internet goes out and just how dependent like we have become on it. And you really think about it as, when the internet does go out, life can get a little bit boring if you don't have a life outside of your box.
Well, that was the thing. So
it can be something.
So we're limited on our cell phone towers, and so after the internet went out, so everybody's hitting their data and everything, and I mean, I couldn't even load a Facebook page or anything. I mean, I had full strength LTE, but I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. So,
You guys even have 5G in Pittsfield?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
They can't. We have our high school seniors here can't even spell 5G. So, it's one of those. It's one of those things.
Shots
fired.
Man,
I bet the trucks sure are lifted though, so it don't matter.
Yes.
Trucks are lifted.
Matter.
The cowboy hats are on. The mullets are fully grown and flying in the wind.
We call that the douchebag starter kit here in Pittsfield, where you have to have at least a 12-pack of Busch Light in the back of the truck. Your truck has to have at least a 6-inch lift, and you have to at least you either have to dip Copenhagen or Skull. So,
hey, by God, that's if Build a Redneck had a store, that's exactly what it would all come with, man. As I've traveled to a lot of these rural area high schools, it seems to be right now the schools that I've went to is California, just outside of Jeff. I counted, I think, 18 mullets in one class.
Oh, that's the new. That's the new thing. That's the new thing. And I laugh my butt off whenever I see that. I'm just like, so this is the thing. I was totally floored on by. I went to Bryson's buddy's birthday, and I have Bryson's buddy's older brother in my class, and he's totally shaved. So he shaved his side off, and he's got his hair long. He said, "Now I'm just waiting to get it permed," and I said, God, you are so white trash. So white trash.
Man, we've got Morgan Wallen to thank for that one.
Yeah, thanks.
I mean, I guess I can't talk bad. I'm growing my hair out right now, but God, I can't get behind the mullet. I can't do it.
Speaking of shots fired, Sean, Kung Fu Kyle McGuire says hopefully Sean has a better night than he did at WLW Saturday night.
It was a rough one.
Your fans.
Sean Patrick did lose.
Patrick did lose.
I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there for it altogether, but it was.
I will say the guy who won, have you trained with him before? Or have you guys did you know him prior to that? He's really talented, man.
Yeah, let me. I've got one thing to say. I've got one thing to say for the fans of WLW and anyone here that's got to say anything. Look, sometimes we go out there and we make mistakes. All right, whether you have a little bit too much liquor before you step in the ropes, it doesn't matter. All right, at the end of the day, even though the Illustrated Man didn't get the job done, I will go back into that ring and I will defeat whoever I need to go back and claim my junior heavyweight championship belt. And you can put all the cash down you want. I will be back on top, not only on your mother, but on top of the world, baby.
I knew it.
How we do it.
I knew we couldn't go without having. There it
Don't you forget it.
Yeah.
Don't you forget it.
It's a bold statement.
Hey, speaking of bold statements, a handful of years ago, what was it? Do I have that right? Is it 77?
77.
Am I wrong? Or
yes.
was it 77 years ago? And would it have been Sunday or Monday? It would have been Sunday, correct?
June 6, 1944. Yeah.
Yeah. So June 6, 1944, a little semi-famous event known as D-Day took place, and our lovely historian, Mr. Andy Van Beber, is going to give us a quick rundown of exactly what D-Day stood for, what it meant to our nation, to the Allied nations, and what exactly happened. So without further ado, Mr. Andy Van Beber.
Yeah, thanks. Talking about World War II, if anybody who's had me for class knows that I love to talk. And by the way, if you know any veterans who, by the way, fellas, we're down now under the last count I heard. We're under, I believe, 3,000. We're under 3,000 American vets left over from World War II, I believe, in this country now.
Wow.
So
yeah,
because you get those guys who signed up like when they were like 18 and they survived. Those are the guys who are still alive.
Well, there was kids who were like 16 in the war.
Yeah, right. You had kids who what do you want to call it? Fake their age. But so some of the things that there was a lot of, when you look at D-Day. By the way, D does not stand for anything. Every year whenever we have kids always asking me, what is the D in D-Day? It doesn't stand for anything. D-Day is just actually a term that I don't know if it's a military term or if it was just a term at the time that was used to describe, okay, this is the day that we are going, because they've had, there have been various D-Days, but this is the D-Day, codenamed Operation Overlord. This was planned at a meeting. The first planning of this meeting was done in October of 1943 at a meeting between the Big Three at Tehran, Iran. And there was some discussion about whether or not the invasion should occur. What should happen first? The mass invasion of France, but actually it was Winston Churchill who had convinced Roosevelt and Stalin that they should go into North Africa first and come up through Italy, which they called the soft underbelly of Europe, and then once they could do that, then they could take it to the Axis powers. And there were a lot of cool things that had played into this. I love talking about this, but just in a nutshell, this was the beginning of Hitler literally screwing the pooch, because he had devoted so much of his troops to taking Stalingrad. His ego wanted to take Stalin's namesake city, which took troops away from North Africa, which allowed us to take North Africa, which allowed us to take Italy, and then march in, and which made Normandy happen. D-Day itself was supposed to be scheduled for June the 5th, 1944, but one of the things that they had to really worry about on this was how the tides were going to be. If any of you who have lived around the oceans or have been to, Gulf Shores, or you've been to, Galveston or anything like that, where there's low tide and there's high tide. And planning this, you wanted to plan it to where you were not, because if you came in when the tide was too low, you could be almost 3/4 of a mile to a mile away from the beachhead. That's how far those landing craft could take you in. And so they had to plan it to where the tides would be right. We landed on 5 different beaches: Omaha, Juneau, Sword, Gold. Omaha, Juneau, Sword, Gold. I cannot remember the 5th beach for the life of me right now. But they talked about, so this was an international effort. This was and still is the largest invading force in history. 150,000 men, 12 troops from 12 countries were involved in this invasion. Eisenhower almost did not. Eisenhower almost did not lead this invasion because he and Churchill had gotten into it on a lot of different topics and everything. There were, and at the time to prepare for this, there were 18,000 paratroopers who were dropped in the night before behind enemy lines to help soften things up. There were Allied Air Forces over the course of the week before June 6th that flew over 14,000 sorties over Normandy and bombed the crap out of the Germans. This was, I mean, monumental planning. And then and I've always said this, if you're not, well, I don't want to watch a gory war movie or anything. I show this, I don't know if I showed it to you guys when you were in Modern World or not, but the first 10 minutes of Saving Private Ryan is probably the most historically accurate.
Yes.
When Spielberg did that, so when Spielberg made that movie, he actually had test audiences of veterans. And of course, that movie is, I guess, 20 years old, 25 years old. Am I right in saying that? Does that sound about right?
Roughly about, yeah.
And so he did these test groups, and the guys who came out said, I mean, some guys walked out crying because they remembered seeing their buddies. I mean, just the onslaught. You know, people think, okay, you just walked up on the beaches. If you see some of the photos from like the beachheads that these guys took. I mean, it wasn't like walking up onto the beach and then, there's the beach. It's like going up on the beach and then going up onto these cliffs. And for all intents and purposes, one of the greatest reasons, well, we had great commanders who were in place, but the other thing was the planning, the sheer number. I mean, we had the Germans outnumbered almost 10-1 at that invasion. And, and Eisenhower knew that there was going to be significant losses. Now, on June 6th alone, out of the 150,000, and that's the other thing people think, D-Day did not just, I mean, it was a stretched out campaign because once they landed, then the Battle of Normandy, we stayed in Normandy, France until August, until we had conquered all of the German, once we could say, okay, we've got the Germans pushing back. That was all, so June 6th, June, July, August. We spent 3 months in that region of Normandy. June 6th, we were able to take the beachhead and get a landing force and be able to get tanks and everything on the beach. But we, on that first day on June 6th, we lost. And there's been some discussion, and even still this day. And I actually, kids that, one of the stats that I try to give, and still to this day, there's still not an accurate count. And I actually went to history.com, and I also went to the Normandy, and I'm actually looking. So on the low end, what they're saying is that there was probably around 4,400 guys who died on D-Day, Allied troops. Some say as high as 10, and I was like, why don't they? And it's just about, the massive dead bodies and who was here and who died here and who died it. But, all said and done, there was, after the Battle of Normandy was done, there was around 16,000 men. And so I watched some videos yesterday, and and again, that's why I say, if you know somebody who's a veteran, heck, if you know somebody who's over 80, sit and talk to them. Just sit and talk to them and listen. All those old crazy people that don't know what they're talking about. Or, if you go down to a nursing home and you do find somebody who's of right mind, and you sit down and talk to them. They just want to tell you a story, tell you about their life. And, I was just watching some of these old videos of these guys, and some of these guys who had not, and like I said, history.com did a 60-year, this is back obviously 16 years ago, but when they did the 60, they got a bunch of these guys who hadn't even talked about it, and what they experienced, seeing their friends die. And I'll share this one other story, and then, I mean, this was just one story that I read about. There was this one guy he's just an 18-year-old kid, And before he signed up in the military, he was a bat boy for a minor league baseball team in New York. And I saw this in two places. I saw it on history.com, and then I don't know if I posted it or what, but anyway, this kid, he was in this grenade corps, and he was excellent about throwing. He could pinpoint a grenade anywhere he wanted to, because as a bat boy, he threw batting. He threw batting practice. He threw with these pitchers in the minor leagues, and he knew how to pinpoint spot these grenades. And I mean, just stories like this. I mean, and Sean and I were kind of talking about this earlier. On this anniversary, how these guys laid down their lives, and they fought fascists, and they fought fascism, and they fought absolutism head on. And Sean and I were talking about earlier, and I think it was last week we talked about this. Sean and I were texting back and forth about this, about how the Antifas and all of these groups, these extreme groups today, are comparing themselves to the men who landed at Normandy. And we were both pretty pissed about it. Just, that level of, you can't even begin to be in the same, I don't know if I want to say the same room, the same level, the same anything as these guys. I mean, some of these Antifa guys, or some of these activists, they can't function without having their, whatever chai latte before the start of the day. Whereas these guys were probably drinking coffee that was, probably reground about 3 or 4 times, and, never going to see their mom or their girlfriend or their sisters or mothers or brothers ever again, And to look at D-Day, I mean, I could do an entire show. I'm not going to do an entire show, but I could do an entire show just on D-Day. And I mean, if I could I can watch stuff about D-Day all day long. And when I was watching stuff on Sunday, just they had wall-to-wall coverage on history.com, and I was eating it up. So yeah, but thank you, gentlemen, for that. That's 77 years ago. And like I said, if you know of any veterans that are World War II veterans, heck, we're getting now where some of our Vietnam veterans are dying now. I mean,
yeah,
reach out to these guys and really tell them you appreciate their service.
I remember I worked an event. It was actually a drill weekend where there was a car dealership that was had some vets there. It was like a Veterans Day thing of sorts, or it was a car show and honoring veterans. And I talked to an individual that was at the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh wow!
And
that's awesome.
He was telling me, he said some of the worst people that had it during the Battle of the Bulge were the cooks. And the reason why was they were bunkered down, right? They were in their bunkers, and the cooks every couple hours or so would just come sprinting, and they essentially would start yelling for these guys to hold their plates out, and they would just pour food at them basically, and then take off sprinting to the next foxhole. They'd take off sprinting to the next foxhole, just trying to get food in. And on the other side were enemy snipers that were just trying to pick off these chefs as they were running back and forth between foxholes trying to feed these guys. And he said that he'll never forget was towards the end, once they had pretty much worn out the enemy. And if I'm not mistaken, the Battle of the Bulge pretty much ended just because our forces had blocked off any kind of supply routes that the enemy had trying to get back and to where they were. So he said eventually the enemy troops were coming towards them they were waving white. They would be waving white flags, and he said that he saw an individual running towards the American soldiers, waving a white flag. And then he said probably when he was 15 meters, 20 meters ahead of him, he said he just saw the man get shot and drop. And it wasn't from American forces, it was from his own side, the enemy side. They were shooting anyone that was trying to surrender over to the Allied side. Right. And he said there is just nothing like that. I mean, he was like, there's nothing just like watching you're sitting there, and then you see you're about to finally get chow, and then all of a sudden, like, he's 3 foxholes down, you're about to get your chow finally, and then boom, he just gets sniped. Next thing you know is he gets dragged into a foxhole, then you just see another cook come running with another pot, just come running, trying to get you your food, just with a helmet on, just literally trying to get these troops fed. I thought that story was actually like really, really insane. It just kind of goes to show the standards of living, and we've even talked about it on a couple podcasts here recently of just I've got a lot of respect for the young men and women who volunteer to do some of the things they do. Does make me kind of nervous though. I've been at training and have heard people complain about how we might have to walk back from the range to the barracks, and that's maybe a mile hike, and people are bitching and griping about that, and yet here we are, quarter of a century,
yeah,
3/4 of a century ago, we were expecting our 92 Gs, our 92 gangsters to not get sniped as they were running trying to serve some cold hash to the boys. It's definitely a different time.
Yeah, different time, man. I mean, it's I want to share a quote really quick, and I think this quote really summarizes just how significant, and I get chills when I read this. This was said by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and I guess this was a speech he was giving to the men before they did this. And he says, "You are about to embark upon a great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you." I mean, if that doesn't give you an idea how significant that event was and what the role they played, I mean, it's an understatement, really.
When even Andy, you said there was 18,000 troops, airborne troops that dropped in.
Mm-hmm.
Before, is that what you said?
Yeah. And a number of those guys, that was where we had a large number of casualties because those guys took on. I mean, those guys were taking anti-aircraft fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, before they even had dropped. Well, so there's a movie, because it's funny. You said the operation was Operation Overlord, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So there's actually, and again, this is more of a haha, but there's a movie called Overlord. That's a. Is it a Zack Snyder movie? No. Well, some director, some fairly famous big name directors attached to this movie. J.J. Abrams, that's who it was. And it's a silly movie as far as it's about the drop-in before D-Day. It's about the drop-in and how some American troops landed on a Nazi scientist camp where they were like doing an experiment. And long story short, this movie's about like zombie Nazis, of course, or whatever.
Yep.
Nazi zombies. However, they actually do a really good job of kind of showing what it was like being in those planes and taking anti-aircraft ballistics and stuff like that. And it was pretty brutal. And I can only imagine sitting in those tin cans flying in World War II.
I just could not imagine.
The guy who was in Captain or the Winter Soldier and the Hawk or the Falcon, the Winter Soldier, Wyatt Russell was in that movie too. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
Yes, Wyatt Russell. Yeah.
No, I did not know that.
Kurt Russell's son.
Even Band of Brothers, I mean, they do a pretty good job portraying it too. I mean,
anymore. I applaud. I mean, Hollywood did these movies back in the day that were, 60s, 70s. They tried to capture that with John Wayne and all these gritty guys, but as with Saving Private Ryan, The Wind Talkers. I'm trying to think though.
Hacksaw Ridge is a great
Hacksaw
movie.
Ridge.
If you guys haven't seen that,
Midway, I would recommend. So I showed Midway. Midway they did a lot of, and that was the guy who did Gladiator. Who did Gladiator? Who was not Russell Crowe, the
Russell
director?
Crowe.
No, the
Oh,
director.
the director. I don't know.
Oh, come on. I know that.
But he did Midway, and he did. I
Was that
mean,
Ridley Scott?
yes, Ridley Scott. So Ridley Scott did Midway, and he just. I mean, it was a knockdown job. And I just caught that movie during COVID last year on Showtime, and I watched it, and I just totally fell in love with it. And every guy that was every guy that was in it was an actual guy based upon an actual guy, and everything that was written about them and their reports by their commanding officers and all that stuff. It was really cool.
There's actually another one that I have yet to see, but I've heard from. They've done interviews from vets. Dunkirk apparently is a really, really good one. That vets that were there during that time are just like.
And there's
it was like being there again.
I want to slap some of my kids about that movie. It's like, well, it's so boring, and it's like, you don't realize what happened. I mean, those guys were backed up against the ocean. The British had nothing to haul those guys back on, and there's a reason why they call it the miracle at Dunkirk. So, but that's again. The miseducation of this generation never ceases to amaze me. So,
and that's kind of like we had briefly kind of touched on it. Like I had seen, again, when the actual anniversary was on the 6th. I need to stop looking at Twitter because it's starting to just give me migraines every time I log in. But one of the big things they talked about was. It was young individuals and not so young individuals that, lean whatever way they want to lean. No big deal. I don't care whatsoever. What was getting me, though, was the amount of I saw actual tweets, and I wish I could go back and pull them up on my phone. I should have saved some of them that were talking about how it was literally comparing, like I saw pictures of like D-Day, and then I saw pictures of like Seattle from last year, and people comparing, saying like, these are the same Antifa, like these are the same anti-fascist. And to put the same two on a pedestal, look, many people might disagree with me. I genuinely believe that it does take a lot of bravery to go out and protest for the things that you want to protest, especially like when you look at places like Wisconsin where idiots are crossing the border, 17-year-old idiots are crossing the border shooting people with weapons that he illegally took into another state, right? It takes a lot of bravery to go out there and protest for things that you do believe in. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, especially when things can get deadly, regardless of why they get deadly. If you go to a protest and what exactly happened. But to compare the actions of individuals that made a little sanctioned city in Washington State and compare the actions of those and compare them to the actions of the soldiers of the Allied forces that landed on D-Day is mad disrespectful, incredibly disrespectful. Because you're not even in the same category. I think one of the funny. Do you guys remember the name of that little city that Antifa?
I was trying to think of it.
It was like an acronym, wasn't it, or something?
It's not Alex. It was. Oh, I thought it began with.
It was like something long though. It was like an acronym for it. They called it the something. I can't think of the name.
The funniest part about it was within like a week, 2 weeks, they had like a bunch of beatings. Like these members were beating other people like within the city, and they literally made constables to patrol the streets to make sure that people weren't looting and breaking and stealing. It's like, you all built a city with you wanted to have no law, no police, and then within 7 days you had constables and patrolmen to make sure that people weren't breaking your rules that you said you weren't going to have. I thought that was one of the very funny thing is that little town doesn't still exist. Has it finally kind of been washed out, or I haven't heard much more about it since.
The autonomous zone. What was it called? The autonomous zone, but what was it called?
I thought that was. I don't know.
No, there was.
No, it had a name.
Capitol Hill. Chaz. Capitol Hill.
Chaz.
There we go.
Yep.
Chaz.
Yeah.
Capitol Hill.
Chaz.
Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
What a name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God. Yeah. Very, very interesting. And well, and that kind of brings us to the thing. So I want to see your guys' reaction, because this is actually a pretty funny thing to me. We're gonna kind of talk about a little bit about political wokeness, and that's kind of going to be an ever-going topic. But it seems that you can never be too woke in today's society for some. But I wanted to get your guys' reactions and kind of see the Hunter Biden news that came out recently.
Yeah.
For some of you guys know, Hunter Biden had a laptop that was taken and had some emails that were leaked, and that seems to be a reoccurring theme from the Democratic Party, is to use a public email or use an email with not a lot of password protection. It just so happens that all your shit's going to get out there. Sidetracking, if Fauci didn't learn anything from Hillary Clinton, clearly he's an idiot, but he clearly just didn't learn how to encrypt an email.
No.
Anywho, aside from that, Hunter Biden, and I don't know the specifics if it was a phone or an email leak, but he had some iMessages, and these are real iMessages that came out, where Hunter Biden, which you guys know his past, it was leaked that in conversations that he was having with a lawyer, was dropping the N-word pretty freely to a white lawyer that he was in talks with.
Oh, I'm reading them right now. I'm reading them right now.
I gotta look this up.
Here is the thing that is.
You better not be charging me Hennessy rates. Oh my God. Oh.
Yeah. Here's the thing that got me. If you guys go to Twitter, if you guys look at tweets from a lot of individuals, there seems to be a lot of people that have blue checks that were talking about this too. There were so many people that were talking about how this wasn't that big of a deal, right? Saying things like that. And at the end of the day, it's not my place to say whether or not it's a big deal or not, right? But what I thought was so funny was these people were talking about how literally people were like, well, what if this was like Don Trump Jr. or something like that? Like, if this was his emails, the world would have exploded. It would have been the number one trend everywhere in the world. And yet we're not, like, you guys hadn't even heard about it because it was pretty hush hush. There was not a whole lot of talk about it. And I found that to be very, very interesting, is the amount of people saying like, oh, it wasn't a big deal. This was a private conversation. He wasn't using it derogatory, anything like that. And these are individuals that are pretty vocal when it comes to other matters of things being racist or things being.
Yeah, didn't that one country singer?
Unfair.
I forget his name. Like
Morgan Wallen.
Like, yeah. So how is this different?
It's not.
That's my thing.
Yeah.
Yes, is it literally comes down to the narrative. It comes down to who we have to go after. Because the big thing I saw is you guys remember, I did not like him. I did not like Trump. I didn't like Don Trump Jr. I didn't like them. I thought they were both freaking morons. Okay, here's the thing. I don't care what side of the spectrum you are. Had that come from Don Trump, had that come from the youngest Trump, had it come from Ivanka Trump, had it come from anybody within that family, holy shit, it would have broken the internet with people talking about it. Okay? It's Hunter Biden, and, people seem to really. Here's the thing. I understand Joe is not his son. I understand that. But the amount of people that are like, if Don Jr. got caught doing a line of coke, people be like, well, the world's going to end. We are got to talk about this. Don Jr. does more coke than anybody. But when Hunter Biden's doing crack, everyone's just like, well, it doesn't affect me. Doesn't affect me. Let him do all the crack he wants. Let him do all this, all he wants. Let him do all this he wants. It's really weird. It's just weird to me. Like, I don't really have any dog in the fight at all. I don't really genuinely care. But what's so funny is how, because people, the Twitter sphere seems to like Joe, they're like, we don't really care, man. It's all good.
Yeah,
I found that very interesting.
Kyle's agreeing with you here. He said if this was on the Republican side, it would be huge. Just my opinion, but it would not. It would be everywhere, no doubt. So he agreed with you on that. I think that this is part of this. It depends on what area you grew up in, and I was doing some Lyft driving today, and sometimes I go through. I'm in the middle of the Sirius XM free. They have a free title right now, and I like to listen to this. I forgot the name of the radio station, but it has like the old radio programs from the 40s and the 50s, and they were doing this Bob Hope spiel, and Bob Hope was notorious for destroying Democrats. I mean, they hated, this is in the late 40s and early 50s after all the New Deal and all. I mean, but, it was I think back after Roosevelt left office, and I mean, Democrats became kind of a joke because they couldn't come up with anybody like Roosevelt. And so anytime that somebody said something stupid or did something, I mean, they were always slamming the Democrats. And I mean, it goes in cycles, it depends on
Yeah, it absolutely
which
does.
which one of the talking heads you want to listen to. And so right now, I mean, it is the talking head, like Travis was telling us about an article, and he'll have to read that one later. What CNN decide. I mean, right now, and again, I read more of I read more of my news than I do watch it or listen
I
to
can't
it.
watch it.
I can't
Yeah.
It's painful.
because you watch Fox, you know who they're for. OAN, obviously, you know who they're for. Yeah.
They're Biden, right?
MSNBC, CNN, and then if you read, and again, now you have to be careful with what newspaper you read, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, whether it's Washington Post, New York Post, New York Times. I do every 4 years we do this election project in my government class, and the St. Louis Post Dispatch. I've been doing this project for the last 3 or 4 elections, and the kids have to read them. And one of my upper level kids kind of noted to me, he's like, do you think the Post is a little bit biased against Republicans? I said, oh, they're very biased. I mean, and I'm glad the kids are, I mean, but it's just, even what we consider to be local newspapers have a slant to who they want to make look good and make look bad, so.
Oh, you can totally, and that's, I mean, I don't really watch the news either, but you can totally read something, and the bias to me, just, it's immediate. I don't trust this news source because I don't feel that I'm actually getting what's factual. I'm getting someone's opinion. Like I was subscribed to this newsletter I used to read every morning, talking about like the market and stuff like that. But I actually stopped reading it about a month ago because it got to the point where, I mean, some of the stuff was just, there was way too much bias, and like there was an objective there. Like, when you're reading something and it's like, man, I don't feel like I'm getting the news. I feel like I'm getting someone's opinion or somebody's rant on something. And I feel like a lot of news sources on both sides, I'm not saying just, left. I think both sides are guilty of it. And that's unfortunate because I think people want the facts. People want to know the truth. But in this day and age, the truth is hard to find.
My least favorite news broadcaster is on CNN. It's this black guy named Don Lemons. I don't know if you've seen this guy before or not.
Never done.
Don Lemons is a piece of trash because of the fact that he's on, he's on, the CNN newsroom, and he is, you can tell, he interjects personal commentary into every little piece of news. I'm just like, dude, and of course, and I'm 47, I'm not ancient, but at the same time, I remember guys like Tom Brokaw. I was at the tail end of. There's a guy from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, guy by the name of Walter Cronkite. That guy read the news, and he ended every broadcast with, "And that's the way it was, June 17th, 1979." And he ended every broadcast that way. It wasn't "Oh, this is the way we thought it would happen." He said, "And that's the way it was, June blah blah blah, or July." And you respected guys like that. The last, Dan Rather, like I said, Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather, but now you get these guys who I can't even tell you who the broadcasters are,
Well,
because I can't believe them.
I think like it genuinely boils down to a lot of with news nowadays, right? You have to get your clickbait articles. That's what gets people is
All
you have
about
to get your
views.
clickbait headlines.
Mm-hmm.
A guy I listen to, he's a sports guy. Pat McAfee, like has a
Yes.
great show, and it's because he's with his buddies and they just talk. It's sports, right? But they talk about like guys like Stephen A. Smith, right? And this isn't so much political, but Stephen A. Smith is the highest paid sports broadcaster for ESPN right now. And here's the thing. When it comes to his takes on sports, they're absolute garbage. Like they're garbage takes. He is an idiot. If that man knows any sport at all, it might be football. Or not football, basketball. He
Basketball.
knows a little bit about basketball. He's not, but he'll talk about mixed martial arts. He'll talk about football. He'll try to put his 2 cents in about NASCAR like he knows everything. And it's painful sometimes, but then whatever he says, the way he says it, the way he goes about saying it, and sometimes it's just so damn ridiculous that it's headline, 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 and then all the other sportscasters, they talk about what Stephen A. Smith said, and it's that, and Pat and the boys talked about on their show. They're like, we love Stephen A. because he's found a way to make lots of money by doing the least amount of work possible. Like and that is what news outlets like Fox, news outlets like CNN, they go, who's got a big personality that'll just kind of say whatever they want? Because we'll take it. We'll take it. We want personalities. That's what we need. And unfortunately, man, it's just hard to get the news that way. I mean, you're right. I don't like listening to the news. There's certain individuals, like for example, you guys remember like Stephen Colbert, right? And the Colbert Report and all that. It was more like a comedy political show that he would do on Comedy Central. And nowadays he leans a little bit more left and to each his own, whatever. But back in his Comedy Central days, he was pretty balanced. I mean, he was still a little bit more left leaning, but he would always go for both sides, and it was always, But then he got replaced by a guy named Trevor Noah.
I hate Trevor Noah.
My God, oh my God, and it's just like now we're forced to that. We're forced to. It's my only issue that I see that I run into is, man, it's okay to admit when you're wrong. And it's okay to admit when maybe the other side had a good idea, right? It's okay. It's okay to admit it. But golly, even the comedy political shows have gotten to the point where they don't even try to get the left, because there goes their Twitter followers, there goes their Instagram, there goes their deals with all these big companies that, the second you put something out there that might just not, really align.
I think
100%.
it's pretty safe to say that, and maybe you guys disagree, I think the majority of your mainstream media networks, whether it's on social, whether it's any of your popular news networks, TV, whatever, I think most of it generally I'm seeing is left leaning. I mean, in Hollywood for sure, but why that is, we could speculate. We could conspiracies.
It's who sponsors it.
Yes, I mean, we don't even have to speculate it. I mean, it's
corporate dollars
where the money's at.
And part of this woke, and getting back to part of this woke politics, I mean, corporations are. I read an article how corporations have to be careful with what they're doing with this, because I think, one of the biggest ones, and so when I pull up an article, and I'll just show you guys who's on this article here. Here's the guy. You guys know who this is? Mark
Oh,
Zucker.
yeah.
The
Mark.
old reptilian himself.
Yeah. So Mark Zuckerberg has to assume, you know, okay, so everybody's going to buy because I'm the fabulous Mark Zuckerberg. I run the biggest social media outlet in the world. People are going to bow, but some of the articles I read this week was about how political wokeness, the way it was described in the New York Times, was the kryptonite for the Democratic Party. And, and you guys talked about left-leaning news. The left-leaning news is focusing on this civil war that's going on within the Republican Party, but they're also not focusing on the civil war that's going on within the Democratic Party, because some of these people are saying woke politics is, some people are kind of like, look, we understand there are causes that need to be brought up. But there are people who take these stands on some of these social justice issues to a point that it is, that it's ridiculous. I go back to Zuckerberg. You guys talked about, Zuckerberg asked, I was reading this, that he asked Xi Jinping, who's the prime minister of China, hey, would you like to name our next child? What? Because he doesn't want to offend, where the money's coming from, so,
Mm-hmm.
if I could just read something to you guys, and I actually did a kind of a offhand interview with, and I want to get this, I'm not going to mention this person's name. I told her that I wouldn't mention her at the time, but I would like to get her, and I'll tell you guys after the broadcast who it was. But I asked this person on Sunday. I'll just read this conversation to you about political wokeness, and it was, and I just said, hey, I need a straight answer. I'm doing some research. I said, what do you think is the good, bad, and if any ugly of the political wokeness movement? And this person is very active on civil rights and about African American, and so I knew I was going to get a straight answer from her. So this is what she said. She says, I think certain parts of the wokeness movement are great. It forces everyone to have a much-needed, uncomfortable conversation. Agreed. What people fail to realize is that those conversations are meant to be a sort of brainstorming for inclusivity. But instead, everyone feels attacked, and if you've been a part of the majority or have never been called out before, constructive criticism sounds like an insult or cancellation. And that sounds like a personal problem to me. Accountability is important and needed. The bad part about the woke politics movement, this is where I totally agreed with her, is being too woke. Listen to that. Is too woke. As a nation who stole this land from natives and was built on the backs of slaves, we need to have conversation, open conversation of truth regarding our existence and why we are who and what we are today. And then the truth is accountability. And sometimes with accountability, there are repercussion consequences, i.e. taking statues down that honor slave owners who did unimaginables to human beings. But people must face that. But there is such a thing as being too woke. Being critical of every little thing that fits our narrative, no matter what end of the political spectrum we are, honestly takes away from more than we realize. And by that I mean good people are then afraid to, this is where I agreed with her, people are then afraid to be themselves because we spend so much time trying to criticize every little wrong that bad ones do. Example, instead of finding alternatives to bad policing, like using mental health professionals as a solution to solve certain crimes, some people want to get rid of the police altogether. Essentially having our streets look like part 5 of The Purge when there are great cops out there. I'm not guessing. I personally know them. It makes zero sense. Too woke. Same thing with sexual assault victims. I believe them. All predators should be held accountable in ways that I won't say because she said, because it's Sunday and I just left church. But when we start to pick and choose what constitute as sexual assault, like a guy whistling at you on a movie set and wanting to file a lawsuit against the production company, it becomes something deeper. That individual should be held accountable. If he's fired from that production, so what? Bye. But when we start canceling the entirety of everything he's done or about to do, you're also taking away from others who haven't done a thing. People who just have mouths to feed, just like you. People who spent years perfecting their craft and should have faced someone else's consequences. We spend so much time trying to make an example out of someone that we may give them an extreme consequence and don't realize how it affects others. And she goes into some other examples, but she said you would agree with this, Sean. She says, I like dark humor. Family Guy, American Dad, The Office. You know why? Because they make fun of everyone and everything. They won't be canceled unless Seth MacFarlane is a sexual predator or a racist, because everyone enjoys making fun of each other. It would be nice to get back to that. And I mean,
whoever
and
that
I had
was,
this.
that is the best.
It's super intelligent. Yeah.
Yeah. That.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I'll tell you who that is. I'll tell you who that is after the broadcast. And I asked her if she would like to come on the pod, and she said she would love to come on the podcast sometime. So
yeah,
Sweet.
definitely. And thanks for sharing that. That was
I had this conversation with Tony and some friends of mine that were over the other day. It was, of all people, it was Cat Williams had a very good point on, like, he was talking about cancel culture and like comedy, right? And how there are some comedians that are like, oh, well, you just can't joke about anything nowadays. And here's the thing, man. There's some stuff, like, you can try to make a joke about anything. More power to you. No one is stopping you from trying to make a joke or to make lighthearted about any situation. No one is actually going to go out and stop you from doing it. However, if you swing for the fences and you miss, you are going to be held accountable. There are people that like have said some things that people might say, well, that's real questionable, but it worked. And Cat Williams talked about how he's like, well, if you relied on nothing but, this kind of stuff that people just don't want to hear about now, then were you really that funny in the first place? Like, were you really that good of a comedian if all you relied on was that kind of humor? Like, I have watched an individual at open mics I've been at kills a crowd, and I'm not going to repeat the word that he uses on here because it's a homophobic slur, but he would come out every single set. I watched this man try this joke close to 100 times at different open mics that I went to, and he would come out and I kid you not, this is exactly how he would do it. He would start his open mic time with, how many of you guys like impersonations? A couple people in the crowd might raise their hand if they hadn't seen this guy before, because I knew it was coming next. He's like, good, well, I don't do them. And then he would say a homophobic slur. That's how he would start his, and the crowd was like, nope, I don't want to even hear from this guy. I don't want to hear from this dude. Nope. But I've heard other comedians use that word and it kills the room, like in a good way. Because it's a joke and people aren't going to take it, but it's all about the context, all about how you.
Well, they probably don't open with it.
Yeah, they don't open with that, but then there's so much that goes into it. So that's why shows like South Park and Family Guy and those shows have been so great. And some people are still going to say things about them, like that. Oh God forbid, they joke about this, but it's.
So for you,
I don't know.
When you do comedy, Sean, what for you is where's your boundary line at? When you're delivering a set, where's your boundary line at? I mean, I've been to one of your shows and I loved it, but I mean, what's your boundary line?
So me personally, I don't make racist jokes. I don't really make homophobic jokes. Those are two that I kind of steer away from. And it's not for a matter of like, because the thing is like, I know I couldn't really make them funny. I have seen comedians make jokes that a lot of like people would say, okay, that's racist, but it's a good, like, if it makes sense to say it's a good joke to where like everyone laughs. It's not like the edgy 16-year-old white kid's like, haha, that's funny. It's like, no, like this individual made a joke and it was able to kill a room with, 10,000 people in it, like I think it's okay. I think that's that level. I don't really ever touch those kinds of jokes for a bunch of different reasons. I don't want to make those jokes. It's just not what I do. But I have other stuff that's like, pretty out there. I mean, you guys have heard my comedy, but you got to understand too, when you start telling jokes, you're gonna miss a lot. I mean, that's just part of learning the joke. I was going through it on my phone, literally on my notepad in my phone. I have bits like the start of jokes written down. They're not completed. They're not finished jokes. They're literally like the idea that popped in my head that said, okay, I could turn this into a joke. If some people found those, they'd be like, what is wrong with this person? What is going on in his head? But it's just like it's the wet concrete. It's not even poured into the mold yet, right? And so when you do jokes, when you tell them, when you practice them, what a lot of people don't understand is when you see a special on Netflix or YouTube or HBO or Showtime, what people don't understand is those jokes have been told probably thousands of times. Usually it probably over the course of a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years even. I've seen a special that didn't, like Adam DeVamp, he was in Workaholics. I saw him perform a special. It came out on Netflix like 5 years later. Same exact jokes. He had just been doing them for 5 years to get his special done.
Yeah.
So
if I look, and I'll just give you guys a couple of examples. And I'm Sean, if you know anything about comic history, I'll give you two guys who. So in the 70s, and I've mentioned this guy before, Don Rickles. Don Rickles was an insult comic, and his career was at laughing at bigotry. And I mean, he made he was Jewish. He made Jew jokes. He made, he called them Polak jokes. He made black jokes. He made, but he said, he always, and I don't think people would listen to him all the way through today, because he said, I laugh at bigotry. God made us, and then you go flash forward to the 80s. If you guys haven't heard of this guy, see if you can sit through about 2 minutes of a guy by the name of Andrew Dice Clay. Okay. Andrew Dice Clay was probably by far one of the most sexist, racist, homophobic, and the guy he was a shock. I don't know what else to call him, but a shock comic. And he made a living for himself through the 80s. And I mean, even something as so, I love British comedy, like Monty Python's Flying Circus. John Cleese did an interview here a couple of years ago. If you guys, I love John Cleese, but he just is like, he said what you said a while ago, Sean. You cannot, what Cat Williams said, you cannot tell a joke anymore. It's the purpose of the joke is to make light of what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm. No, I another one that I always like bringing up, because some people just seem to forget, just because like towards the tail end of his career, he was doing more like ha-ha fart joke kind of comedy things, and even Disney movies, and stuff for DreamWorks. Not little person, but a fellow by the name of Eddie Murphy.
Yes.
A lot of people seem to have not listened to his stand-up before he was like Donkey from Shrek, or in the Haunted Mansion on Disney.
Eddie Murphy Raw is Eddie Murphy Raw by far is one of the. If I have a guilty pleasure, it's that album. Eddie Murphy Raw is
one of the most iconic stand-up performances of all time. And he was in his early 20s.
Yes.
In his early 20s. I mean, but that's the thing is, like, if he did that special. Now, Bill Burr, and I know I've been going on we fell all the way to the comedy thing, but Bill Burr had a really good thing. I think he was on Conan. And it's one of the funniest things I had heard, where Conan's like, well, Bill, what are you hearing about this? If, people want to cancel you. And Bill's like, what are you talking about? Like, is like, well, on Twitter, people are saying, you can't be saying these kind of things. They're not going to go to your shows. He's like, let me tell you something. The people that are on Twitter that are bitching about the jokes that I'm making, we're not going to come to my shows in the first place. All right. So by whose definition am I canceled? Because I just did a show where there were 20,000 people. So I think I'm good. Like, I don't think I like, okay, am I not going to be in a movie? Okay, no big deal. I'm all right. Like, I don't want to be in movies.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in those stupid people movies. And
So
but yeah, Bill Burr was still on The Mandalorian on Disney Plus, so I think he's all right.
so if you take this back to our whole thing about woke politics, and we've covered cancel culture before too. Do you think that we're coming? And I think more people are getting more critical about woke politics and can. I mean, do you think that we possibly might be coming towards the end of this? Is this something that people are
I
recognizing?
do.
Okay. Why
I
would you think?
do.
Why would you think that?
The reason why I do is just based off of certain things that I'm at least seeing, where people are quote unquote trying to get people canceled, and I think people are really starting to come to terms of like, and this sounds dumb, but and some people might not get this, but the cancel thing is real big on things like Twitter. I legitimately think there was a span of time for a couple of years there where legitimately even corporations, big corporations, where people were getting fired and losing their jobs, literally thought the people on Twitter had power to get things kind of done. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say that, and because that's where it was big. Like, people would talk about stuff on Facebook, but it wasn't the number one quote unquote trend in the world like it was on Twitter. But you look at companies like Chick-fil-A, right? Chick-fil-A is, according to the internet, the hell on earth. Like, it is the worst corporation, the worst kind of people, the worst everything. Yet every single time I drive by the Chick-fil-A in
Got the
Jefferson
lines
City
out the door.
at noon, out of the door, and it is wrapped around the building 6 days out of the week, not on Sundays. Okay. They had the best sales they've had. 2020 was one of the best years they've ever had, even during COVID when they weren't, I look at individuals like Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt got hammered down on because he was going to church, and people were talking about how he went to a church where they promote conversion camps. And Chris Pratt's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I started going to church with my wife. But these people came down on him, were demanding that Disney got rid of him from Guardians of the Galaxy. We're making all these it was over 1 million tweets about this kind of thing. People thinking they had power to get this man fired. It didn't happen. I continue to see it where it'll pop up for days. And again, what Morgan Wallen did, not acceptable, right? Like, you got to be accountable for that kind of stuff. He's still having a sold out tour coming up. Like, sure, his SNL thing got cut, but he's still touring. He's still making money. He could be an independent artist and still be fine. Chris D'Elia, who had his whole sex scandal thing that came out about him, he's fine now. His podcast is I never liked the guy, but controversy aside, he's still getting millions of hits on his videos. Like, we're starting to see where now, unless it's that like Epstein, Kevin Spacey level of what are you doing, it's kind of starting to roll back. At least that's what I'm seeing.
Travis, what do you think?
But that,
I'm not quite as optimistic. I hope eventually, I hope Sean's right in this. I hope it is winding down. However, I think what this is just more fuel into the fire with this left versus right battle, whatever you want to call it, that's going on in America. And maybe it's just my environment where I live. I mean, I live in Chicago, Illinois, where I'll just say the woke mentality here is pretty heavy. I mean, just recently, I went to the Contemporary Art Museum in downtown Chicago, and I consider myself a pretty open-minded person. I'm into art and all that stuff, and I went into it with an open mind, and I mean, the agenda was just literally just beaten into you. Like I couldn't enjoy it. Like it was just, so I see stuff like that, and again, this is just my environment, what I see, but I think as long as we're still, consumed by the stuff we see on the internet, the media, and these influencers out there spreading these agendas, I don't. I mean, I think there's more of an awareness to what is going on. Obviously, we're talking about this right now, but I think that awareness with this agenda is still getting pushed down our throat. It's just adding fuel to the fire of this, left versus right mentality and nobody willing to work together, which, the whole point of our podcast. But
Yeah.
yeah, until people actually start coming together and saying, okay, let's be reasonable. And, yes, there, forget which one of you gentlemen said it, there are, or I think it was what you were reading with, what the guest shared. There are issues that need to be discussed. There's
Mm-hmm.
accountability, but it's not just pointing fingers at each other and no solution.
And that's been the
Um,
and that's been the base of, like we said, like you said it perfect there, Travis. That's been the goal of this whole podcast. I mean, when we came together and Sean and I first started brainstorming about this back in October of 2020, I mean, that was the consensus that we both came upon. And quite honestly, and I'll share this just from this standpoint and being honest with you guys, from what I remember, and Sean, you and I have always had a relationship even after high school, but what I remember of Sean in high school is, okay, well, here's this kid that's way off in left field, and I can't. But coming to a point now where I consider you guys to be friends, and now we're just, we work on this podcast together, and to be able to say, okay, how can I take this from a different point of view, and I think it was Sean that said earlier, admit to being, when we have these discussions, admit to being wrong. You know, I mean, when we did the show on minimum wage a couple weeks back, I change. I mean, I'm still not for the whole going gangbusters on going crazy, but at the same time, some of the stats, and I had, I'm never afraid to say, okay, I'm going to recant on some of this stuff because I was wrong. And I think that that's part of this woke culture, though, is nobody wants to admit that they're wrong, that they went too far, that they affected somebody's career, that they affected somebody's well-being or their family's well-being. You mentioned Chris Pratt. What? So Chris Pratt went to a church with his wife, more or less to, like you said, to appease his wife. Okay, I mean, this kind of talk is almost, it's McCarthy, and I may be using a historic term that some of you guys may not get, but McCarthyistic. Joseph McCarthy was during the 1950s, was a guy who wanted to make a name for himself. He was a senator from Wisconsin, who was a terrible senator from Wisconsin. He was up for re-election. He was going to get booted out, but he wanted to get his name out there, so he became a communist hunter. And he did the speech in West Virginia, and he said, "In my hands, I have the name of 204 members of the State Department who are known to be affiliated with the Communist Party." And so Joseph McCarthy would have these hearings before his Senate subcommittee, and he would bring these people in, and he would say, I mean, it was like, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, of, well, so you had your maid's mother-in-law's cousin who was who attended a communist meeting. Has that influenced you in your And I mean it. And for 3 years, Joseph McCarthy drug people through the mud and caused a wedge to happen in, I mean, this fear. And we're seeing the same kind of McCarthyistic tactics being used today with the woke mentality of, if you say something, oh, are you a racist? Oh, are you a bigot? Oh, are you a homophobe? Oh, are you a this? Or oh, are you a that? And I go back to what that guest said. Like you guys said, it is about accountability. You know, 10 years ago, I used to use the term retarded all the time. Oh, that's just being retarded. Well, you got to be careful in using that term today. You know, you it's it's an offensive term, and I stray away from using that term. You know,
Mhm.
I, a term that my dad used all the time. He would say he'd say, "Oh, that cotton picking thing, or that cotton picking this, or that cotton. You're out of your cotton picking mind." Okay, just listen to that word, cotton
Mhm.
picking. What's that in reference to? Black people. You know, and you really have to watch. I mean, it's stuff like that. I'm for being woke and being correct and being more sensitive on issues like that. But at the same time, going to such an extreme to where you have to watch. I mean, something that you had no intention of being racist. Oh, are you racist? Oh, are you just like I said, like McCarthy in the fit? Oh, are you a communist? Let's take a realistic look at stuff.
Mhm.
There's there's so much more we could really go into with this, but
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
I don't know how far down we want to go with it. I'd
No.
love to have that.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote that to you, I would love to have them on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we call it an evening here, and I've actually really enjoyed this conversation. I know sometimes like it can seem like a bit of a ramble, but I always do enjoy just getting thoughts out of the head with you guys. It's really nice to be able to just kind of have those kind of conversations. And I know that a lot of people like to enjoy and sit there and listen to them as well. It was actually funny. I had spoken with a friend recently who I didn't know listened to the podcast, and they always love when it comes out the next morning after we record it live, and they on their way to work and while they're working out they actually listen to us, and I find a little bit of joy in that, and they say that they really really enjoy it. So I like those kind of things, and I'm glad that other people do as well. But we'll definitely hit the head. I've actually got a pretty cool thing. It's going to be a little bit out of left field, but you guys know me. I've got some cool ghost stories for you guys next week that we're gonna talk about.
Fantastic.
So
Fantastic.
we can find some other fun stuff. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Enfield poltergeist, which is the most documented poltergeist case in existence. And you guys might be a little bit familiar with it if you've ever heard of The Conjuring 2.
Okay.
Which adds a lot more of a spin to it, but it's a very interesting story, and I'd like to share some of that stuff.
We haven't talked about paranormal stuff in a while. Yes, I definitely interested in
I've
that.
got a good one.
All
Yeah,
right,
it's a good one.
All right.
Well, gentlemen, is there anything else that you guys would like to add before we sign off this evening?
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. It's great to have Travis back this week too. We missed him last week. Thanks for
I'm
thanks
back.
for Hank Owens for filling in for us last week. Even though my favorite Hank Owen quote last week was, "I don't know what to say. I just like sitting here and talking with you guys."
Yep.
It's okay. I don't either. I just kind of show up and we kind of figure it out. Sometimes they send me the link. Sometimes I have to just get in. I don't know.
Yeah. All right.
I love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you all so much for giving us a listen and for your continued support. You can, again, find us on Podbean, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, right here on Facebook Live. Again, from the bottom of our hearts, we can't thank you enough for continuing to listen. This has been the Voice of Reason podcast, and we cannot wait to chat with you guys next week. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.